Hello again, Gills fans. Welcome back to Gills in the Blood TV. I hope you are all continuing to stay safe in the current COVID-19 pandemic, all following the guidelines and looking after your loved ones. Is a very testing time for all of us. No football, no social life, being told how to live. It's something that pretty much all of us are not used to, and something that we're all having to try and get on with as best we can. But I did tweet out yesterday and promised a new mini-series, and today is the first part. The new mini-series is called Gills by Position. So I'm going to do goalkeepers, defenders, midfielders and attackers. We're not going to, break it down too much further than that into like fullbacks, wingers, inverted wingers, number 10s, etc. It's just going to be them four categories. First part today is goalkeepers, looking at 5 of the best shot stoppers that I've seen in my time since I started going to watch games live, early to mid-90s. And then obviously honourable mentions to those that didn't quite make the cut. Like I say, goalkeepers is first, and then in a couple of days we'll look at defenders, then midfielders and strikers, trying to keep the channel ticking over. As I've already mentioned on previous vlogs, since all this started, it is very tricky. There's no live news, live football to talk about, to bounce off of, so we're having to be a little bit inventive and a little bit creative. I've tried a few things on the Facebook page and Twitter, the isolation 11, making a team plus bench. I've seen people doing commentators, I've seen people doing chairman, out of household objects that you have indoors with you at the moment. I did the toilet roll challenge. 18 I think was the best. That was me. So if more of you want to get involved and try and beat that, then feel free, because it'd be great. Seen a lot of pictures on Facebook, Twitter, Football Manager, FIFA, all getting a caning at the moment. A lot more people listening to music, trying to find other ways of keeping themselves entertained, which is great. And like I say, the biggest thing is I hope that you're all safe and well and looking after your loved ones. But anyway, let's crack on with the first part of this Gills by Position series, goalkeepers we are looking at, and the first one coming up on your screen now. That is, of course, Big Fat Jim. He was one of the first signings made by Tony Pulis after his appointment in the summer of 1995, shortly after taking over when Paul Scully bought the club and effectively saved us from going out of existence. As I say, effectively and affectionately known as Big Fat Jim. But Big Jim Stannard was more than that. He was a very good goalkeeper, got about his area really well, commanding a massive size, would yell at his back four if he needed to. Played a huge part in Tony Pulis' early success as gaffer, and behind his back four, conceded just 20 goals in 46 league appearances in 1995-96, as us and Preston North End challenged each other for what was then, I think, the League 2, or whatever it was called then, Nationwide Division 2, I'm not sure. It's effectively what League 2 is now, but Preston ended up pipping us to the title. But Big Fat Jim, superb all season, hugely consistent, big save after big save when he needed to, loads of clean sheets, very rarely conceded, probably deserved to win the title that season, in fairness. Was a huge fan's favourite. Was one of my first real memories of being a proper Gillingham supporter that first season, and used to get involved with a crowd, or, rev up the old Rainer men when need be. Like to have a laugh on and off the pitch. I mean, this is before the days of social media, so you had to see him doing it live. Like I say, he'd get involved with the Rainer men to orchestrate them. Number 1 for 2 full seasons, and averaged about 50 per campaign over 95-96 and then 96-97. And to this day, still one of my favourite shot stoppers that I've seen watching Gillingham Football Club. Yeah, long will be remembered for that excellent campaign that helped us get promoted into now what is League 1. And yeah, one abiding memory, I think, was us beating Fulham at the Priestfield just after Mark O'Connor had his leg broken and it all kicked off. And you see too many pros these days don't celebrate against their former employees, but Big Fat Jim loved it. Was giving it to the Rainer men, fist bumps and all sorts when we scored a winner. And yeah, it was great to put one over on them, and we had a decent rivalry with them, didn't we, at the back end of the 1990s before they got a lot of money and, you know, ended up in the Premier League. But yeah, Big Fat Jim Stannard, super keeper. And yeah, we'll always have his part in Gillingham history, I think. Right, moving on from Big Fat Jim, probably the best keeper that I've seen in a Gillingham shirt, and this is that man. No, that is this man. Vince Bartram arrived initially on loan, I think, early part of 1998, and then joined full-time in the summer, I think it was. He was the man that effectively ended up dislodging Big Fat Jim Stannard as our number one, our regular keeper, and he played a huge part in probably the best Gillingham football side the club's ever produced, in fairness, in terms of winning football matches, getting promoted, and effectively just getting to a level that we've only ever been at for 5 years of our whole existence, and that was then 5 years in the Championship between 2000 and 2005, and he was a mainstay of that side. If you remember, when he got in the side, I think 97, 98, we just missed out on the playoffs, goal difference last day of the season. Nicky Southwell hit the post against Wigan on the final day. 98, 99, we were superb after a slow start. Ended up in the playoffs with a couple of games to spare. Beat Preston over 2 legs, didn't we? Did we concede? I think we only conceded 1 in the 2 games in that playoff. Drew 1-1 at Deepdale, I think, courtesy of a Bob Taylor equaliser. Vince obviously did what Vince did, and that was made us tough to score against. Then kept a clean sheet in the return leg, which saw us through to the Twin Towers after Andy Hessenthaler's early strike at the Priestfield. And then we all know about that game against Manchester City. He didn't have a lot to do, really, let's be honest, did he, for the first 85 minutes, and then goals from Carlos Arbor and Bob Taylor seemed to see us home. But we all know what happened in injury time, and injury time upon injury time upon injury time, and it's quite ironic that we've seen the pictures down the years ever since. Every time a playoff campaign comes around, there's images and videos of his best mate Paul Dickoff slapping one into the roof of the net and breaking Vinny's heart. But like him, like the rest of the team, they dusted themselves off. And again, after a slow start in 99, 2000, we picked up, bearing in mind, sorry, he was man of the match in that first playoff final against Man City. I believe it was either the first or the second one. But yeah, after a tough start to the following campaign, Tony Pulis had left in the summer, if you remember. Peter Taylor had come in and replaced him, brought in a few of his own players. Andy Hessenthaler, Steve Butler had joined the coaching staff as player coaches, and we ended up going all the way back to Wembley once again, 2 years on the bounce, didn't we? And it seemed that there was going to be a case of deja vu in a topsy-turvy game. In what was one of the final games, I think, to be played at the old National Stadium, because it was knocked down in the autumn of that year, wasn't it? But we took the lead early on. Got pegged back by a really good goal from Simon Howarth. Then went behind in extra time. Barry Ashby, very soft penalty. To this day, he protests and says that it was never a pen. But we had to keep believing, and we had to keep digging in, and we all know what happened at the end. And Vince Bartram, again, 2 campaigns on the bounce, played a huge part in helping us get promoted and reach the promised land. And weirdly, one of my biggest memories of Vince is a game that he didn't actually play in, and that was against Wigan at home in that season. And Steve Mortone, I think, was the keeper, an Australian on loan, and he had to start at the last minute because Vince had got stuck in traffic on the way to the ground and couldn't actually make it for kickoff. And it's the game where poor old Steve got lobbed from 20 yards, which is no weird thing. It happens to keepers, except when that's your own centre-half doing it to you. That was Adi Pennant when he shimmed one into the top corner that day. And I think Junior Lewis went on to score the winner, and the famous Big Bird celebration became about. And yeah, just a weird sort of anecdote and side story there to Vince. But there was plenty of games that he did play in where he was absolutely immaculate. And for me, I say he's probably the best keeper that I've seen live in a Gillingham shirt. And he went on and played over 100 games in what was then Division 1. It's now the Championship for us, between 2000 and 2004, when he had to retire, unfortunately, due to a wrist injury. ironically colliding with Millwall keeper Tony Warner, who was up trying to help his side equalise from a corner in a game that we won 4-3. But fourth highest appearance maker Vince in terms of goalkeepers, and there's not many better that we've been lucky enough to have as our goalkeeper throughout the years. Anyway, moving on next is a keeper that joined in the autumn of his career. We're moving forward to 2007, and that is this man coming up on your screen. Our now goalkeeping coach, ironically, Simon Royce, arrived on loan as a 36-year-old at the end of the 2006-07 season, I think it was. Played the last 3 games because we had an injury crisis, and he did enough to earn himself a deal. We signed him on a permanent at the start of the 2007-08 season. Never came across as the biggest keeper for me, but boy was he class, all class. Shot stopping ability as good as anything, distribution decent, and 2007-08 in a really poor side that saw us relegated from League One into League Two. He picked up the Player of the Year award, which says, I think, a lot that you need to know about the bloke. I mean, it's easy to say he was probably getting loads of practice because we were shipping loads of goals and not winning many football matches, but to consistently put in good performance after good performance in a side that is struggling near the bottom of the table and ultimately went down, says not only all you need to know about Royce's commitment and ability, but also his mental fortitude and his mental strength and resilience to keep churning out good displays when we weren't as a collective. And we all know what happened in 2008-09. Back in League Two, we got ourselves in the playoffs, and then we had to play Shrewsbury at Wembley after seeing off Rochdale in the semi-final. Curtis Weston and Simeon Jackson scored the decisive goals over the 2 legs in that semi, if my memory serves me correctly. But we had to take on Shrewsbury Town in the final. They had Grant Holt up front, who was one of the best around at that level at the time. But Royce was first class in that game. This is the final where Mark Stimpson didn't make a substitution. They trusted the 11 that started to get the job done. And we know that Simeon Jackson takes all the plaudits and all the headlines for a late header from a corner that never was. But Simon Royce, I think, if you remember rightly, at 1-0, or at 0-0, right near the end, he makes a really good save at his far post, gets across and claws one out, and it tends to get overlooked because of the dramatic nature of our winner. But testament to Simon Royce and his ability again. And he played over 100 times for the club, like I say, and at that time he was 37, nearly 38, so it says a lot about his fitness levels as well. He then left the club despite being offered a player coach role, and he went to Brentford right up until this summer when Steve Evans and Paul Rayner managed to persuade him to come back. And it's great to have Simon Royce back, another centurion, and yeah, another one with a Wembley winners medal round his neck. Next up is a player that's now 38 and still going strong in the conference with Yeovil Town. That is this man, affectionately known as Nelson. Stuart Nelson. Passion, ability, integrity, discipline, hard work, attitude, all words that sum up Stuart Nelson brilliantly for me, plus no end of ability. Probably one of the best lower league keepers for 4 years between 2012 and 2016. He joined us in the summer of 2012. He was one of Martin Allen's first signings, and he played a huge role in helping us win the League Two title in the spring of 2013. He's the 3rd highest goalkeeper appearance maker behind the already mentioned Vince Bartram, Ron Hilliard, and I think it's John White, the other keeper. Again, if I've got that wrong, I apologise amongst the more veteran members of the people that watch this, but I'm sure it is them 3 keepers that are in front of him. I mean, Hilliard and White are miles out in front, and Nels went past Vinny with one of his last appearances for the club before leaving in the January of 2018. But yeah, joined in the summer of 2012, was immaculate in that league winning season. We were absolutely brilliant. We flew out the blocks that campaign, and I know we somewhat fell over the line, but we had to dig in and win games ugly at the end of that season and pick up points here and there where we could, and we did that, and Stuart Nelson played a huge part in that. He was in the League Two Team of the Year that season, so that says all you need to know about how good he was. I know you might say, well, he won the league, so it's obvious to pick him, but it's not always the goalkeepers that get the plaudits, and he was quite simply the best out of 24 clubs that campaign. 2013-14, first one back in the third tier for the club. He was Player of the Year for us. I think he was in the top 3 in another season as well. He was made vice-captain in 2016-17. That was the season when Justin started, but then was sacked. And there's one memory that sticks out for me, because if you remember, Adi Pennock rested, rotated, dropped, whatever you want to call it, Nels, for about 6 or 7 games towards the end of that campaign, and put Thomas Holy in. And we had to go to Northampton on the final day, and we had to bet a Port Vale's result. And I think it says all you need to know about all them characteristics and attributes that I listed at the beginning of talking about this man. Adi Pennock went back to Stuart Nelson that day and said, "You're my keeper. You're going to be the man that doesn't concede and keeps us in this division." And in a horrible, ugly, bitty game where we should have taken the lead early on, but we missed a penalty, Stuart Nelson kept a clean sheet. He'd done it plenty of times before, but it was probably his most important one, in the sense that it stopped us from dropping back into League Two. And the relief was palpable in the away end at Northampton that day. I broke down, I'm happy enough to admit that. And there's an image that goes around on social media of Stuart Nelson turning to the away fans, both fists clenched, screaming in relief, ecstasy, whatever it was. But he'd done his job and he kept us up. And it was an end of an era, I think, when he left in the January of 2018. His final game was pretty low-key. He was captain in a Kent Cup tie against Maidstone that we lost. But fair play to, I think it was Steve Lovell at the time, made him captain that night, probably knew that he was going to leave. And it's great to see Nell still doing his thing in the conference, the National League, and still playing regularly, because, again, he's, like I say, for 4 years, he was probably one of the best keepers in the bottom 2 divisions of the EFL. And like everyone, old Father Time caught up with him a little bit in terms of league football, but he's still doing well in the National League. He keeps himself super fit if you watch him on Instagram, and they're doing well this season, aren't they? And if it ever gets resumed this season, then he might be back in the Football League before long. But yeah, Stuart Nelson, all the passion and all the ability in the world, and a really good keeper for Gills. And the final one that I'm going to mention is someone who I already have just mentioned when talking about Stuart Nelson. He was 6'9", you couldn't miss him, and that's this man. Unheralded Thomas Holy arrived in the January of 2017. He was one of Adrian Pennock's first signings and probably turned out to be one of his best, along with Tom Eves. Knew absolutely nothing about him when he arrived. Soon became apparent that he was an absolute giant. Like I say, 6'9", filled the goal really well. Played half a dozen games at the back end of the 16-17 season when we just about stayed up. And I'll admit that when I first watched him, I thought, oh, he's an accident waiting to happen. He looked nervous when he had the ball. Distribution wasn't great. His kicking was wayward. And for every good save you saw him make, he always looked like he had a clanger in him. And we got to the summer of that year and pre-season, and we was at Dover, and he come out and tried to claim across, dropped it as he fell and conceded another soft goal. And he was just a keeper that didn't fill you with confidence as a fan. And I can imagine if we felt like that as supporters, then the back four in front of him didn't feel too confident either. But obviously AD had seen something in him, and the goalkeeping coach at the time, I can't remember exactly who that was, forgive me, it might have been Ian Pledger or Glenn Johnson, or did he? I think he might have come in that summer actually, but Glenn got to work with him in that summer, and AD trusted him to be his number one at the start of 17-18, and he just went from strength to strength, and he looked unrecognisable from the keeper that had looked edgy and looked low on confidence and just had no sort of rhythm to his game in them 6 games at the back end of the previous campaign. And he was absolutely brilliant throughout 2017-18, and I think he kept 10 clean sheets that season, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in a side that was struggling in the bottom third of the table for the most part of that campaign, it's by no means a bad statistic at all. And he was second behind only Mark Byrne in the Player of the Year that season. I think the one game that stands out in that campaign was Charlton at home. There's pictures of flares going off behind him. I think he made 5 or 6 absolutely unreal saves to preserve our clean sheet. And I think we won 1-0, courtesy of a scuffed Tom Eaves effort. It was our first win of the season. Came around the time when Roberto Solano was rumoured to be taking over regardless of the result. And we all hoped at the time it'd get us up and running, but I think we went to Rochdale a week after and got turned over by 3-0, and Steve Lovell soon replaced Adrian Pennant or Peter Taylor after that, because I think Peter Taylor did a couple of games, didn't he? But yeah, he just kept getting better and better and better. Like I say, he was runner-up to Mark Byrne Player of the Year that season. 2018-19, he was still #1. He got more used to the rigours of English football. I remember seeing an Instagram post of his at the back end of his first full season, and he said he was absolutely knackered, was running on empty, not used to playing that many games. Got himself even stronger throughout the next summer. 2018-19, he was really good again. 15 more clean sheets, so 25 in total, I think, in just under 100, just about 100 games, so 1 in 4 in a struggling side. Again, it's not a disaster, but there was plenty that had been seen in his performance that led to interest from bigger clubs, and he turned down a new offer of a contract from us and joined recently relegated Ipswich in the summer of 2019, and he's been in and out the side there, but I think he started most of the games early part of the season when Ipswich were really good, and since then they've struggled with Will Norris in goal. It may be a coincidence, but for me, Thomas Holy should be starting for Ipswich. He's a better keeper for Will Norris than me. He was brilliant over 2 seasons for Gillingham, and like I say, probably Adrian Pennock's best signing alongside Tom Eaves. Right, that is the 5 that I've picked. There obviously are honourable mentions that didn't quite make the cut. Jason Brown, really good in the Championship after he replaced Vince Bartram, played for his country. Stevie Banks, everyone remembers that save at Forest, I think it was, that kept us up back end of 2003-04 and kept us in the Championship for another season. And Paolo Gazzaniga was only a kid when he was with us, probably looked very raw at the time. But he's now playing Premier League and Champions League football for Tottenham Hotspur via Southampton and Spain. So there's 3 other really good keepers that we've had in my time, and they're very unlucky not to make the top 5. But that is it for the goalkeepers section. As always, comment down below on YouTube, reply on Facebook, reply on Twitter. Go and check us out on Instagram for Gills related pictures, and yeah, let us know your top 5. Obviously, if you've been watching the Gills for longer than me, there'll be different people that I've not mentioned at all because I've not seen them live. The likes of Ron Hilliard and others, you know, let me know. Anyway, that's enough from me today. I'll let you get back on with your Monday evening. Please, please, please follow the government advice. Only go out if you really have to get food and essentials and medication. Only travel to work if you really, really have to and can't work from home. And if you're going out and doing your exercise, make sure it's only with members of your own family and you stay away from others and adhere to this social distancing. Look after yourself, people. It will get better. We're not sure when yet. But until next time, up the Gills.